lottery would be perfectly fair, I suppose. I mean, everybody, you want to be an orthopedic surgeon, throw your name in the hat.
Good afternoon and welcome to the podcast for doctors by doctors. My name is Dr. Ned Palmer, and I'm going to be alone today, unfortunately. My co-host, Dr. Jerkins, will not be here, as you can tell as soon as you're seeing these clips. But I am very excited today. We are bringing back a guest, Dr. Bryan Carmody, pediatric nephrologist from Virginia, who is really, I think, one of the foremost experts when it comes to talking about the match from a deep insights perspective, not just the data, not just what happened, what's good, bad, but really like one of the most comprehensive experts that I think we've ever had the pleasure of talking to about the field of medical education, what's coming next, how do students match, how does the match work, what does it mean for medical students, what does it mean for even residents going through match again when you go through fellowship. These are conversations I really look forward to. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bryan Carmody. Today on the podcast for Doctors by Doctors, we're joined again by Dr. Bryan Carmody, who's a pediatric nephrologist in clinical practice at the Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters in Norfolk, Virginia. He also teaches second-year medical students and serves as an associate pediatric residency program director at the Macon and Joan Brock Virginia Health Sciences Center at Old Dominion University. However, he's probably best known as an analyst and commentator on medical education and residency selection. Social media alter ego is the Sheriff of Sodium, and he shares his opinions on X at JB Carmody and YouTube, Sheriff of Sodium, as well as on his website, thesheriffofsodium.com. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Carmody. It's great to have you back.
It's great to be here.
We're just going to open up with a couple of rapid fire questions just to break the ice here, even though we already know each other. But so if medical education had a Yelp rating or a Yelp page and a Yelp rating, what would that star rating be out of 5 and why?
Well, that's a good question because I think that in many ways medical education works well. I mean, I think in many ways the end result of the U.S. medical education system is doctors who are trained that are the envy of the world. So I mean, I would say 4 stars.
If we had room to improve, how do we get that last star? You and I are both biased members of the community and also trying to improve it.
Yeah, there's many things. I mean, like I said, the end result may be good. It doesn't mean we get there efficiently. I mean, there's all sorts of, there's years of, CV padding and organic chemistry and, and things that are not, that end up not being directly relevant or additive really to the care that's provided by people at the other end of the pipeline. I mean, if you're an interventional cardiologist, I mean, how much of the hand anatomy do you need to know? So it's an inefficient system for one thing, and then there's other stuff that we could talk about that may come up in the podcast too.
Inefficiency in care delivery, I mean, has plagued, right? Like even where doctors are compared to where patients are has been geographically misaligned for a long time. So there's definitely areas we can talk about misalignment there. Now kind of jumping onto that though, if you could make one medical education buzzword disappear forever, which one's getting the axe? I know what my what my answers would be, but I'm curious what yours.
I don't know what's yours.
Mine is grit. All on that one, grit. It kind of comes from that whole like wellness and resilience space.
Yeah.
Which is critically important and delivered, I would say, inefficiently. I'll use your diplomatic term. I would say any training that residents have around resilience, wellness, and grit is inefficiently delivered because it's never received correctly.
I do feel like we're in the post-peak grit era. I mean, I feel like we've gotten a little bit over that hump where I hear that less than I did, 3 to 5 years ago, let's say. I think that was peak grit,
That was peak grit, was 3 to 5 years ago. Okay. Maybe that's why I'm still suffering from it.
No, you're right. That's one that I agree.
Any from you though? I don't want to poison the well here or kind of pre-populate. Any for you that you're like we're post that we've got to look better.
I don't know. I've probably become inured to all the buzzwords. I mean, where I built up such immunity to them, I guess, that I they roll off my back like a river over stone.
Maybe what I'm learning already is I need to channel some of your zen when it comes to these things and not let them bother me so much. And now another fun question we've been asking our colleagues in medicine here. Do you remember a moment from residency or med school that would make it into your proverbial blooper reel? Something so abnormal, so laugh out loud, something that just kind of broke the characters in the space that would make it into your personal blooper reel.
I probably have many. I guess one that comes to mind for whatever reason is I remember being a senior resident. I did my residency in pediatrics. I was a senior resident. I was admitting patients to our hospitalist service. And I don't remember exactly the medical circumstances, although they're not really relevant. The key part was that maybe like a 4 week old or something was getting admitted for whatever reason they were getting admitted for. And it was a straightforward admission. I was trying to grind through the orders, and a medical student went in to take the initial history. And so when they came back and were telling me about the child, I said, "And what's their diet?" And the medical student sort of looked at me sheepishly and said, "They said he doesn't eat anything." And I was like, well, I mean, being a human being, we all are going to have to eat something. So I'll just have to get to the bottom of that when I go in and see. So anyway, I went in and I asked some questions. I did my exam and stuff. And then to, provide the proper admission orders, I inquired. I said, what does the baby eat? Now, you got to remember at this point, the poor grandmother who was with the child, they've been asked these questions innumerable times from the ER resident, the ER attending, the medical student, now me. It was late at night. You're unfed. I mean, everybody's cranky and whatever. So I mean, this is all very understandable. I don't mean this at all. But anyway, and she glared at me and I said, "What does your baby eat?" And she glares and she says, "He doesn't eat nothing. He drinks bottles." and, and so I felt like I walked into that one.
You stepped on a landmine that somebody else put in front of you, definitely. Very understandable from the patient side of standpoint, from the patient standpoint at that point. Yeah. Yep. Definitely can't even imagine being asked that same question 7 times in a row like nobody's listening. So, but I do want to transition. Look, I always love our conversations. I really enjoyed our previous conversation, especially now. We're about 5 months before the match, as we are in the calendar right now. Before the match, the main residency match. There's others, of course, in December and then early January, depending on where you are. But for the match, I did want to talk about this past year's data before we start looking ahead. Like, what was, I think, the biggest surprise to you, somebody who ardently studies the match year over year? What were the biggest surprises that the data spoke to from this past year's match?
Oh, I think there's very little that surprised me. I mean, as a keen-eyed watcher in this space, no, there was very little that surprised me. I felt that the overall statistics. I mean, they were, to be honest, not to toot my own horn. I mean, they're about what I expected, really.
In terms of those like expectations, just for what were some of those highlights where you were like, yeah, that was as expected. That was as expected. Here, they performed well. They didn't perform well. Like, what were some of your expectations going into it that the match met?
Much of what's going to come in the match you can anticipate through the application statistics, and it was clear already that it was going to be a lean year for family medicine and pediatrics. Um, it's those stories have been discussed sort of at length. I mean, as applicants have chosen to pursue specialties that, to be frank, are more prestigious and higher paying. Applicants in greater numbers pursue those. Meanwhile, those primary care specialties continue to add positions each year, and applicants haven't quite been keeping up.
Why hasn't the application volume kept up? Because I think historically there were, IMGs filled that gap a lot on some of the primary care specialties. Like and there's more IMG schools being opened up. Like we hear about there's more Caribbean schools than ever. As a Caribbean graduate myself, I know there's more international programming. Why aren't those applicants like keeping up, I guess? Like, why isn't anything filling that gap or backfilling some of those positions?
From the beginning, we should set out. I mean, all the positions eventually fill. I mean, any position that goes initially unfilled in the match is certainly going to fill in the soap or after. If the hospital wants it filled. I mean, there certainly are a number of applicants who, even if they don't apply in that specialty initially, would be eager to take those positions. Given a second chance. But yeah, no, I think that there's real value for an international medical graduate who, I mean, imagine that you truly, your prime goal was to become a physician in the United States, and the specialty was not really a concern. You felt you could be happy in any specialty. Um, by far the most popular specialty for international medical graduates is internal medicine. It attracts by far the greatest number, and but there's real value in applying to family medicine or pediatrics because those as you highlighted, the growth in international medical graduates has not been as robust. Now, not all programs are as interested in recruiting international medical graduates, but as application numbers dwindle, I think many programs are finding they need to readjust their recruitment strategies. We've seen this play out in recent years in emergency medicine as well. I mean, which used to be a specialty where that really was not very international medical graduate friendly. For a number of reasons. I mean, first and foremost being that the positions would largely fill with U.S. MD and DO graduates. And then second, you have a recruitment system that, emergency medicine was on the forefront of having standardized letters of evaluations and things that are not necessarily easy for people outside the U.S. system to jump in and get. But after, a couple of years ago, we sort of reached the tipping point for emergency medicine where a decline in U.S. applicants created space, and now application numbers have rebounded, but it's rebounded on the strength of more international medical graduates and osteopathic medical graduates. The USMD numbers have rebounded only modestly.
Okay. For emergency medicine specifically, was some of that kind of domestic tailing off, that interest tailing off, did that have to do with that report about saturation in the field? Do you think like just were those contemporaneous things that were happening? There was a lot of noise probably 3 to 5 years ago about ER saturation and EM doc saturation, private equity moving in, like a lot of headlines kind of all at once came. Like, is that the same timeline that you started to see some interest being lost?
I think there's a few things. I mean, and certainly different people will have different opinions on the relative importance of all these things. But you're right. There was a well publicized workforce report that suggested that we're training more emergency medicine physicians than we probably need. And that's not what you want to hear as an applicant who's choosing a specialty that you want to do for the next 3 to 4 decades. I think obviously emergency room physicians bore the worst of the brunt of COVID, and seeing what those physicians went through. I don't think beyond a certain point when all doctors were heroes, it became probably a negative recruiting thing, to see that these folks are on the forefront of battling COVID. Emergency medicine, there are multiple studies that have suggested that for whatever reason, emergency medicine physicians seem to have a bit more burnout than the sort of the median physician pulled to the pile. It's good to talk about that. It probably doesn't help your recruitment though to talk about it that much. There's been more of a transition toward private equity owned emergency medicine groups and hospitals that make the working experience maybe less desirable. I think all those things have contributed to the perception among USMD applicants that maybe the kind of person who a decade or 15 years ago would have chosen emergency medicine, now maybe they choose something else. So I think all those things are sort of on that timeline.
Yeah, definitely multifactorial there. And of course, you're absolutely right. We can't discount the impact COVID had on that field specifically. None of us were spared, but especially on emergency medicine and how they're, I think, still carrying some of that trauma. So, we talked about EM, we talked about, family, peds, internal. Who kind of came out as the biggest winner? Were there any like, oh, wow, like that was a really like exceptionally strong grouping this year or an exceptionally strong specialty?
The specialty, I guess, that comes to mind would be anesthesiology. I mean, which has become increasingly popular. And really, I mean, you never know what's happening on an individual level, but in the aggregate, the decrease in interest in emergency medicine has been offset by an increase in MD interest in anesthesiology and radiology, So I think, especially anesthesiology has become a challenging, match for the past several years. I mean, it's, they're not having trouble filling positions.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I hadn't thought of it, but, I could certainly imagine the group of people who are interested in emergency medicine find a lot that they like in anesthesia. It's procedural. It's typically can be hospital based. You also get some more flexibility with maybe some outpatients or groups being in like an ASC or something like so. So that's really interesting about anesthesia. That's great. Is there one stat from the match data that you're seeing that people are totally misunderstanding? You've kind of poured through the headlines of people interpreting the match.
I mean, the big thing that that always irks me when I see it is, whatever specialty has a rough time in the match, there will always be headlines talking about, such and such specialty had a rough time in the match, and then linking it to, a supposed physician shortage. And of course, that's silly. As I said, I mean, positions may go unfilled initially, they'll fill. Any position that people want to fill, there will be someone who can fill it. And unless the people choose to say, "Oh, I've soaked into this program," I mean, when they start on July 1st, nobody knows. And the positions are filled. So you may have a personal soapbox to talk about with emergency medicine or family medicine or pediatrics and a workforce shortage, but really the match data don't support that argument.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great call. It feels like when people conflate weather and climate, it's like you're talking about this little micro event over here of how did pediatrics do this year? Like, okay, that may be an indicator of some other ongoing macro process happening, but in reality, you're actually really looking at a very small pocket here, and you really shouldn't be extrapolating out. So it's a great call. And then one last question on the match for right now, though, like if you had to wrap it up or match news specifically, if you had to give this year's match a single headline, what would it be?
That's a good question. I would say I think we're going to see increasing competition in dermatology, neurosurgery. I mean that's what we see in the initial preliminary data. So I mean I think that the battle intensifies or something would be the headlines.
Competitiveness has inertia, and it will keep being more competitive as it goes. I like it. Yeah. Yep. Yep. What is something about the residency selection process, not just the match, but the residency selection process that you wish every med student understands sooner?
I guess the thing that I would say is, and I guess this doesn't have anything to do with the match, but I think that your future happiness in your career is not really tied to your specialty choice, really. Um, there's a lot that my I guess my personal bias there is that people who are happy in medicine probably would have been happy doing multiple specialties. If you'd set them on some parallel path, they probably would have been happy doing multiple specialties. And people who are disgruntled and unhappy and feel like they're, getting a bad deal, they probably would feel that way in most places, I mean, so so I think, now, I mean, certainly, people have different ideas about what a doctor is to them, and people have different conceptions of what their salary will look like and what it needs to look like, and a lot of that I think gets tied up in, you know, what your match quest is targeting, but in reality, I don't know that much. If you look at these people 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, I don't know that that's the key thing in their life. That's what I would say.
I would wonder if another problem that you see in a lot of students, because I hear this a lot, these questions that I get asked, where people make selections based off averages. And averages are a wonderful thing, but nobody represents the average. Frequently, it's a multimodal or bimodal or, like multimodal split that the average then really truly represents no one, especially if you've got like a deep, like public or private practice split. So we hear that all the time. It's I'm sure you do. I know dermatologists making $200,000. I know family medicine doctors making $600,000 depending on how they structure it. But students make their minds up, like, oh, like based off what that average is, that's posted by the AMA every year, and like I feel like that's a big challenge that they make, like you're describing.
I think that's exactly correct.
And then how about from the actual process of the match and like student preparation for it? Like how important are USMLEs right now? And then is that the appropriate level of importance, or are they overweighted or underweighted in their importance in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, for a reason that may surprise some people, I think the USMLEs in a certain way are becoming less important. But what I mean is, I mean, if you follow me, one thing that I frequently discuss is, the trends in USMLE performance, and as you know, those trends are increasing. I mean, if you look at the mean USMLE Step 2CK performance, it increases by around a point a year as an average. But that's not the only thing. The other thing is that the distribution of scores has gotten more compressed, such that you know, there's really not, I mean, of course, you can always tell which number is bigger, but the difference between, someone at the 75th percentile and the 20th percentile is less than it used to be, you know? And so I think that that makes it a little bit less of a useful discriminating variable for programs. Now, having said that, when programs receive, many, many more applications than they have spots for, they're seeking something, to help stratify those applicants. And the USMLE is the most convenient and universal of all the somethings that you could use. So, I mean, it still is quite important, but I think it's going to become a little bit less important, and that's because of number one, the just the math of what's occurring. But then number two, I think that in years to come, especially, there's going to be less screening that's done manually by the program directors and more that's done in an automated way by AI systems. And how much they will weight USMLE versus other things. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's up to the end user who's asking the bot to screen the applications.
The Luddite part of me is horrified by that, having been through the match and trying to make myself stand out to a human, not knowing how to stand out to a robot. The flip side is I wonder if you can actually feed resident performance back in and create like really an end-to-end engine model then, which could even be more powerful and a lot less subjective, right? A lot of residency performance, as we know, like has a lot of subjectivity to it, in things that are maybe intangible or tougher to measure. So maybe I should be less terrified of the AI taking over taking over the match process.
On its face, I mean, I think there are some potential advantages. I mean, it depends how you train your bot and what you ask your bot to do. But I mean, in a world where we're using screening cutoffs and letting a single data point sort of relegate a certain number of applications just to never being reviewed, I mean, at least having something that reviews your application would seem to be a benefit. But of course, it opens up a whole new area of gamesmanship because now you're writing your application, you're writing your essay, you're describing your activities, not the way you would for a person necessarily, but to optimize them for the bot. What are the words you got to hit to show that you're a certain kind of person that that has grit or something like that. How do we teach the bot? So it's easy to imagine residency selection devolving into yet another bot war. Between the bots that write your application and the bots that read your application.
Yeah. And in some ways creates an arms race. Like I know you've written about, it's certainly one of my favorite topics that you write about. Now we've got bots on bots. And so is mine better than the guy next to me? And does that make me a better doctor, or do I have access to different resources as always, right? Like when we talk about, misallocation of resources and what that can mean.
Right.
Last time we spoke, it was, I want to say it was shortly after, maybe within a year or so after step one had changed to pass fail. And there was still a lot of, it's going to make inequities worse because students aren't going to be able to separate themselves early versus like the flip side camp, which was, it actually levels the playing field and is better for all comers. Where do you think kind of like, there were a lot of very strong words being said about both those paths, about deepening inequities or actually flattening the playing field. Where have you seen the change to pass fail in step one has changed the applicant pool, I guess, and kind of who was right?
Sadly, I mean, I think not much has changed. I mean, I think it's a sad story because, actually, let me set this out from the beginning. I mean, if you liked to scored step one, you can make an argument that, having a scored step one is more fair and that, not having it disadvantages certain applicants. And that argument is probably true. But if you didn't like it, you can make the argument that having a scored step one was not fair, and that that it disadvantaged a certain group of applicants, and that similarly is true. There's no USMLE scoring policy that can simultaneously advantage all applicants. It is a mathematical truth that 50% of applicants, by whatever metric you use, will be below average. And so it requires a value judgment to say, well, we should disadvantage or advantage this group or that group. Or you have to focus on something else. You have to focus something more on your values or fairness or something like that. So if you go back to the step one thing, I mean, you may remember the timeline here. It was February of 2020 that the NBME announced that step one would go to pass fail. And of course, 2 weeks after that, the world was falling apart. And, and so, you know, if you, if you want to make medical education better, and you go back to 2019, I do think removing a scored step one, the it was a necessary first step, but you got to replace it with something. You've got to have better alignment between, what medical schools are trying to accomplish and what residency programs are trying to accomplish. Because then, and you may have heard me talk about this before, but I mean, one of the biggest problems that we have is that we have a medical education system that, in a way, I mean, it has a certain end goal. I mean, the goal of your medical school and the goal of your residency and fellowship program, it's all to train you to be a competent and capable physician. That's the goal of everybody. And yet, the school, the deans, the administrators, they have their set of incentives and reward system, and your residency program similarly does, and those are not aligned. And so we've got this discontinuous system that seemingly should be working on the same goal, but it's fragmented and it doesn't work well because medical education, undergraduate medical education, medical educators will say our goal, our mission is not simply to stratify students for selection to prestigious residency programs. That's not what we're here for. And residency programs at the same time, they want the best applicants. And applicants want to present themselves in that way, and they will do whatever residency programs say they should do to surpass and look good on those metrics. So really the holy grail would be for residency programs, to articulate what it is that they want, and for medical schools to teach those competencies and rigorously evaluate those competencies. Because at the end of the day, in any competition, someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. But if you have a meaningful competition, a competition where the winners are actually those who have acquired the competencies that we most want them to have, well, now you've got something that benefits society. I mean, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose, whether we have a lottery or whether we have people memorize the dictionary, or everyone can't win.
It's a brilliant take. I will, full transparency, I was on the side of where this all started, pass fail scores having value. I ascribed value to step one, being a numerical value had that. So I appreciate you shaking me of my that kind of like philosophic entrenchment. It's true. So how do we get, though, like piggybacking onto that, there towards the end, it feels like there's a misalignment with everybody taking sort of like a myopic view of like what their slice of your career journey is, right? Like my med school was focused on a certain thing, my residency something else, fellowship something else. And there were like quantized breakpoints like you're describing, where you get into the next one and the rules have changed and it's all shifted out from under you and you're operating under a totally different kind of set of priorities and goals and things like that. When in reality, it probably should be more linear than this kind of like quantized stepping stone. So like, how do we get better alignment between these programs? Is there any one organization that's trying to work on this, call it integration, or maybe just recognition of the rest of the path?
Yeah, it's hard because you've got different players. I mean, like I said, if you think about, and this is all because of the historical path dependence. I mean, medical education in our country started with medical schools, and medical schools sprang up, and some were sort of proprietary and some were aligned with universities. But then over time, we've had an increasing focus on graduate medical education and increasing legal requirements for licensure. First that you've got to complete an internship, and now in many states, you have to do at least several years of postgraduate medical education to even be licensed. And that didn't primarily come out of universities or schools. That primarily came out of hospitals. And hospitals and universities have different incentives. And so the problem is we have, like I say, we have different incentive structures. No one's saying, oh, your medical school's great because we looked at your graduates 20 years down the line and they're doing these things that are good for society. People are looking at your medical school and they're saying, oh, your school's good because of your graduation rate. It's high. And now you have an incentive.
Or your match rate, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. So what incentive does that give the school? Well, we don't want anybody to fail out. It doesn't matter, our admissions committee is now infallible. If you got in, we have to get you through because otherwise we're going to look bad on the metrics that people care about. Our match rate, we've got to not be quite honest about everything because last thing we want to do is have somebody that doesn't match. That's the incentive structure that you've set up. And similarly, I mean, like I said, there are different incentives that underlie postgraduate medical education. I mean, first and foremost being the availability of cheap resident labor to provide patient care, and so there's a different incentive structure and a different reward system and different competencies that are important. So that's, I think, the problem is that we've got organizations that view their success through different lenses, and apply pressure at different people, the deans, the program director, the whatever, to shade things toward the goals that they want. And I think that's what we got to get out from under is if we want medical education to be a continuum where there's an end goal that has a societal benefit. I mean, we've got to articulate what we want to get out of it and build a system that has the appropriate incentives to get that out of it.
I love what you're describing. In some ways, medical education has been really, I think thoughtful in terms of interrogating the metrics that we judge students by, that we judge residents by, because we know in all things, like, you kind of default to being, reverting to teaching to the test a little bit. And so the metrics really matter. But then the field itself, like when you zoom out a little bit, is still stumbling over these same metric-based challenges of like, I love what you said about like school-based attrition rates, right? Like, it's insane to me that a school could say like full-throated, like we graduated 100% of people that walked in the door. That's terrifying to me that anybody would find that a positive. But, in some ways, students are consumers and they need to sell this, that if you get in, you've got the best possible shot of going out to becoming a doctor. So you do have some kind of like fundamental misalignments there when your incentives aren't really interrogated and judged correctly, right? And established.
Yeah.
Back to the match again, which is really critical to, I think, so much of what happens in medicine, right? It's like, why do we have July 1 contract dates, even for grown-up doctors? I'm still on a July 1 contract date, right? Like, there's so much like second, third, fourth, fifth order effects of like the match. Is it broken? And if not, what is it? Is it misunderstood? Is it working? I guess like it's just tough to tell sometimes.
I think the language is sometimes a little bit messy. I mean, from my standpoint, you know, there's the match, meaning like, I don't know, the match with capital letters and like the little C in the circle, like the matching algorithm. And I think that works pretty well. I mean, as you know, there was a Nobel Prize in economics that was, awarded to people who came up with the idea of using this kind of deferred acceptance algorithm to match up different sides of a market. So, I mean, I think that system, I think that works great. I mean, really, you can argue with a straight face that it can't be improved upon, I mean, at least algorithmically. But then there's the match sort of with air quotes. There's the match writ large, and by that you mean everything that goes into it. The metric chasing and the CV buffing and yeah, right. And there, it's a lot of, I think it's right to look at that and see a lot of calories burned and dollars spent chasing things that aren't that useful. And at the end of the day, you get the same number of winners and losers that you would have had if you just pulled names out of a hat. So we're taking all this time and expense, and guess what? We're going to have the same number of dermatologists that we would have had if I just, had a lottery or something. And so from that standpoint, it's easy to say, I mean, are we getting the value out of the residency selection system? When we say the match, I mean, the idea of saying, the match as like I say, using an algorithm to pair up a large number of, different entities that want to be matched to each other, that seems like a pretty straightforward thing to me.
Mm-hmm. But the fluff is where it gets complicated, right?
Yeah, it's the residency selection process, yeah.
Within that process, like, how can we make it fair? I think we've talked about this kind of peripherally related to pass-fail metrics. Like, I think one of my concerns, and I've certainly seen much smarter people than me write about it, is like, there's winners and losers, but are we being fair in how we attribute winners and losers? Because, picking random names out of a hat would in some ways level the playing field pretty substantially. And so like, do you believe that the residency match process is lacking some amount of fairness? And if so, what can we do to bridge that gap?
No, you're right. I mean, a lottery would be perfectly fair, I suppose, I mean, everybody, you want to be an orthopedic surgeon, throw your name in the hat, and we'll pull out the number that we have, and you know, that that would be fair in a sense, but it would offend many people's moral sensibility because it's not a system that would inspire excellence. I mean, which is a big thing that people worry about. I mean, like if all I got to do is get into the lottery,
Just get your name in the hat.
I mean, yeah, guess what? I mean, I'm not writing any more of these, silly case reports that I've written, 8 or 10 of, I mean, I'm not writing anything else for, these pay to play journals. I'm not gonna, break my back over USMLE Step 2CK. And at a certain point, I mean, many of that stuff, I mean, I think much of that, I think, is really just pure, next to pure waste, or even worse. I mean, I think a lot of the research arms race stuff really just results in research pollution. I mean, it results in stuff in the literature that does not make the literature better. It actually makes it less helpful, harder to find what you want. It puts garbage out there that gets cited. So, I mean, there actually may be negative utility from some of that. But I mean, think about Step 2CK. Well, I mean, at a certain point, I don't know. Does that compromise patient care if people don't, treat this as such an important test, any longer? So I think what you want is, getting back to the point that I said before, you want a system where we reward the things that we want to reward. You know, if it's important to have doctors in your program who, I mean, fill in the blank, whatever the competency is, who are skilled at interviewing patients, let's say, well, then really what we want our medical schools to do is to teach that well and to rigorously and fairly evaluate that. And guess what? Some people will be better at it than others, and some programs that will matter more to than others. They'll say, I want someone who's prepared and has a very high skill level in this on day one, and therefore it's fair and justifiable to say, well, then I want this applicant who's demonstrated that competency. And other programs may say, well, I want something else, and I can build up these other things because that's sort of what I'm here for. That's what that's what our program does. Is it helps build up your whatever, your diagnostic acumen, your procedural skills, your whatever it is that you care about. Um, but we gotta say what we want. And part of the frustrating problem, like I say, is that graduate medical education and really overall, we have a hard time saying what good doctors are. I mean, and if we can't decide, if you can't even decide like what makes a good doctor, I mean, what are the things that go into that? We've got sort of a criterion problem that makes it very hard then to say that any one thing helps create a better doctor more than anything else because we don't even know what a good doctor looks like. So we gotta do a little bit of that hard work, realizing that it's a little bit imperfect, and that many of the things that we want to measure aren't easily measurable. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we should just gravitate to whatever the easiest thing to measure is and let that determine everything.
Yeah, that kind of like reductive logic towards setting incentives leads to like very perverse outcomes. I mean, I'm sure you remember it was long enough ago. It may have been early career, but ER is being measured purely on time basis. And it was like, well, like throughput measurements and time-based measurements. Again, like it's, we've spent a lot of this conversation talking about incentives. You move to those incentives or you modify to those incentives, and so ultimately you end up with the fastest ER with the worst quality because we've chosen something easy to measure. We've pulled it out of kind of the panoply of things that are easy to measure without really looking deeper into what do we value. So how do you mentioned AI before, but like where do you think AI is really good at unstructured data and trying to see through things and frankly trying to find signals in noise, which is where I think we've seen a lot of good out of AI already. Where do you see that in the match process? Like, who's going to be using it more, do you think? Is it going to be, on the applicant's end? Is it going to be more on like the reviewer's end and the selector's end? Like, and is anybody kind of like starting with this already? I guess we've already been through a match cycle where AI was kind of publicly available. What have you seen?
I've seen a lot of applications that I felt like were substantially generated by ChatGPT.
Did you put any through a GPT detector?
No, I didn't. I mean, the feel of it.
Oh yeah, yeah, the uncanny valley.
Yeah, plus, I sort of have a sense of, I don't know, what the spread of personal statements reads like. And, last year it was different. I mean, last year was different. There were a number of very polished and yet somehow inauthentic sounding personal statements, you know? I mean, I feel the same way about letters of recommendation, you know? You see a lot of those that seem like they might have been spit out in substantial portion by ChatGPT. But I mean, I think as programs gravitate more towards screening and scoring with artificial intelligence kind of systems, I think then, like I say, then it creates, as you said, an arms race. You know, where applicants, I mean, now you better get your best bot to to take on my best bot and bypass these hurdles and get yourself an interview. You know.
I'll be curious, like what ends up becoming the objective measures, right? Because like you said, you need to train your bot on something. So what are you telling it to look for, and how are you kind of manipulating the system right from jump, right from your like prompt engineering? You know, what are you going to tell it to look out for? Hey, go ahead and define what quality is, and then find a quality candidate. Like you can see that being the snake that eats its own tail, and just never coming up with like the right answer.
At most programs, most residents are pretty good. And you could replace a resident with a different resident or with Folgers crystals or whatever, and people probably wouldn't notice. But the bad residents, the problem residents, people always remember. Program directors always remember and really strive to avoid. And really the things that make bad residents, I mean, sometimes there are important, knowledge deficiencies and things, but more often than not, I mean, there are character and professionalism issues that are what makes a resident a challenging resident to to successfully get through training or develop themselves. And so I don't know, could AI find the tells in someone's application that point to that? I'm not sure.
As you're saying that, I'm kind of running down the catalog of the residents that didn't finish in our program, and it was almost exclusively character professionalism, very limited on knowledge base. Several of them were very well published or went to excellent schools, like really, knew the medicine, but for some reason there was a professionalism gap in there, which is interesting. And it's also interesting, what you described of like program directors being human. Sometimes we're not always sure, but program directors are very human, which means I wonder if their own incentives, right, feeling burned by the trainees that it hurt them, are they trying to avoid that, which is one mechanism, or are they searching for the best doctor for their program? And I do wonder, like, I'm sure in some cases there's probably more avoidance, which then changes the incentives, or what happened to you last year, the catastrophic resident from last year. How does that change what you're searching for year over year? Like, is that a psychology that you see in program directors as they're making these decisions?
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I mean, I think many program directors, I mean, that's the main thing, or one of the main things they're trying to avoid is having their colleagues come to them and say, why did you take this guy? This is the worst, Yeah. And so, I think that either subtly or overtly, one of the ways that that's approached, one of the things that you do to defend against that is, have something that you can sort of outsource your decision to. So, well, his letters were great. Everybody said he was wonderful. His dean said he was the best they've ever seen. His, board scores were more than adequate, So it wasn't me, that got fooled.
Yeah. I see all these objective things that I tried to bring in to make this decision correctly. Yeah. I have data. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay. One last question before we get into some rapid fire true false here to start winding things down. But what is one prediction that you have for Match Day 2026? You called 2025 pretty well. Where do you think 2026 is going to go? Any surprises you see for the field?
There's a data point that I've been puzzling over, and I think it's going to be true this year when I look at the initial application data, and that is that there seem to be fewer USMDs entering the match. And I'm really not sure what to make of that.
But there's more schools. They're opening new schools all the time.
Yeah, there's more school. Exactly. I mean, like the numbers should be rising steadily. And I mean, it's a little bit hard to tell because, nowadays we have multiple application services. And so there may be some applicants who, are no longer using ARIS, they're using Residency CAS or other things. But, there are alternative hypotheses that people have posited. I mean, there are a somewhat larger number of students who, with a pass-fail step one, they're not prepared to take it on the school's timeline for them to take it, and they end up prolonging their medical education a bit. But you'd think that still that should play out.
They should show up eventually.
Yeah, exactly, right. The other, tantalizing alternative hypothesis, which again, I don't know that we have much data to support this, but I mean, it's an idea that's out there, is that fewer medical school graduates are pursuing residency, that more are trying to stake their claim in industry or tech or, doctorpreneurship or something.
Entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, and so whether we're seeing that, reflected in the match data, I do wonder. So I'm interested to see when all is said and done and the dust settles, how many match applicants we have, and is that going to be up or down from last year?
Oh, that'll be really interesting. Okay, well, I'll certainly be reaching out after March of, well, I guess the data comes out, what, June, July?
Yeah, we'll have the preliminary data, day of the match, or actually that week. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'll look for it. Frankly, I'll check in with you personally because I'm fascinated to hear that too. Because I've heard a lot about this where I teach in Boston, it comes up all the time. And anecdotally, fully anecdotally, so the worst type of data, just to let everybody know, is I have heard, when you kind of go around your small groups or go around your classrooms, I have heard far more of that. It started, I think, mid-COVID, of far more people saying like, oh, like I'm here because it'd be really helpful. I'm planning on going into biotech. I'm planning on going into X. I've already founded a startup, and my board thought it'd be helpful for me to get an MD. And you're like, oh, okay, I didn't know that was a pathway that existed. So
Right. I mean, it does seem like, though, that's not something that you used to hear. I mean, like 20 years ago, whatever, you might have an occasional person who sort of got into medical school and realized they didn't really like patient care and sort of looked for an off ramp. But it doesn't seem, I mean, unless that memory is faded, that there were people who entered medical school with the idea that they really were never going to practice clinical medicine and they were going to earn the degree and do something else.
I think we've talked about the upsides of industry. There's the dirty side of industry, which maybe I'm not supposed to call it that, but like the insurance side of things, where insurance companies are bigger than ever. There's more middle people and administrators than ever, and are people going straight into that kind of like that industry, right? Like the insurance industry, the private insurance markets in the US are larger than they've ever been before, just like, so many other things that have grown. Are we just simply losing more trainees and early career docs to that? Because frankly, it's a great way to make a decent salary. Like I can't disagree with the people that do it. It's a great way to make a decent salary working 9 to 5. You don't have to take call. It's not bad. So, all right, Dr. Carmody, we'd like to round out with a couple of true and false statements here. So these are just going to be some rapid fire ones, okay? Just getting you ready for it.
Bring it.
We've covered some of these a little bit, so you're definitely ready. But the match works exactly as intended.
True.
Step one going pass fail made things better for students.
True.
Prestige still beats performance in residency selection.
I'd say false.
Most students overestimate how competitive their specialty really is.
I'd say false.
The best predictor of being a good doctor is not your step score.
True.
I think I knew that one. After this conversation together, I probably could have guessed that one. I could have guessed most of these. The one I couldn't have guessed is the students overestimating their competitiveness. You think students do a pretty good job of understanding the competitiveness, of their, like what their specialty is during the match process?
I do. So, like with anything, there's people sort of, what sentiment they express, and then what you actually observe. And if you ask applicants, do you know what program you're going to be competitive at, especially, in a certain situation, if you ask them that, they'll say, I have no idea. It's totally unfair. I don't know. But if you observe where applicants apply, especially in a world of preference signaling, which we have now, where you now know, and you're entering many specialties, you better send your preference signals to places where you're competitive. That's where people send them. So when the rubber hits the road, I mean, I think applicants do know. They may express that they don't, seeking reassurance or sort of just as a general expression of the uncertainty. But if you actually war game it, they know. They know where they're going to be competitive, and they behave accordingly. Now, of course, and the people who don't suffer. I mean, there are applicants who misinterpret their own competitiveness, and they suffer, for it. But overall, the median medical student really if you had to, if you said, I know the answer to this question and I know exactly where you're competitive, and I'm going to make you bet your car, your house, or whatever, a chunk of your student loans on the outcome of this question, they'll answer correctly or close to it. I really think.
Why do residents then? Because this is one where maybe I flipped, and I'm still kind of on the other side, but you're selling me. Why do residents rank so many programs? Because mathematically, past a certain point in the rank, I'm going to bungle this, but it's something like residents rank twice as many programs as is mathematically required for them to get a match. And it's something like after your fourth or fifth, please correct me because I'm sure I'm bungling these, but something like after your fourth or fifth resident rank, there's really no like mathematical addition that you're getting from subsequent rank orders. Am I close?
Yeah, so the data that you're sort of alluding to are the charting outcomes and the match data. So the NRMP produces these graphics that show that based on the number of programs that you rank, the probability that such an applicant would match. And most of the curves sort of look, like they'll start low and then they'll reach a flat of the curve after, a certain number of interviews, and that's as good as it gets. It's important to remember, of course, those are observational data that, it's not like the NRMP is randomizing people to get 9 interviews or 8 interviews and seeing what happens. And it's important also to realize that just sort of from first principles, all you need to match is one program that likes you quite a lot. And so there are some applicants who, I'll put it this way, when match day comes, I usually hear from a number of applicants who didn't match, and I try to sort of help them through SOAP week. And so one of the first tasks that I have is figuring out why they didn't match, because that informs your strategy. And there's always a couple people who have this sort of story where they got a lot of interviews and they didn't match. And what that tells you is that on paper their application was fine. They met the standards for the program. But because again, programs, they're not wasting their own time by interviewing people they don't need to. They're interviewing about as many people as they think they need to fill, because they don't want to waste faculty's time and expense. So what that means is if you interviewed at a lot of places and you didn't match, sadly what that means is you don't interview well, and that you ended up at the bottom of all those programs' rank order lists and you never got down to that part. And so really you got to get that figured out like ASAP if you want to have success in the SOAP. Like right now, you got to figure out what you're doing or saying or giving off in the interview that's not going your way. So but all you need is one program, to do it. But part of the problem is, to get back to your question, since I'm wandering on, is that any data like that becomes a target. You think about it in your practice, you have probably some RVU target or something. Well, what do you think happens to those targets every year? They increase because, everybody's got the same target. It's like, oh, I've got to hit the 50th percentile, but if I hit that in November, I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to get a few more and, and now guess where the 50th percentile is next year? It's a little higher, So anyway, every year that you do this and you see, well, the average applicant does, 8 interviews. Now it's 9. Now it's 10. I've got a graphic that shows how that's increased over time. So part of it is just the perception that I've got to do all this because that's what everybody else is doing. The last thing you want to do is be below average, right? Yeah.
Fascinating, and thank you very much for that walkthrough there. Last question that we close with every time. You're the only person who's gotten a chance to answer this twice, so we'll see. We'll be able to compare your prior answer, Dr. Carmody. What is one thing that you've changed your mind about when it comes to the match or medical education?
What did I say last time? Do you remember?
I got to check the tapes. It was about the match, and I think it was that you were very bullish about the success of the match. And I think we spoke, it was 3 years ago, I think, 2.5, 3 years ago, and it was something to do with like match success rates and how you had switched from being bearish to bullish on the overall process of the match.
I think the match algorithm works well. I think I've always felt that. I think that people who call for the abolition of the match, like me and the algorithm, there are certain applicants, like we were talking about, certain applicants would benefit from a system where there was no match, where they could sell themselves at a lower price, and get a shot that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. There are certainly applicants who, by being there faster or, like I say, selling at a lower price, they want the opportunity to do that, and they can't do it in a match system, they would benefit. But I think overall, I think the system is better with a match. But I think I've always thought that. match rates are ultimately a function of how many applicants we have and how many positions. The applicants fluctuates a little bit, mainly because, international medical graduates more than any other group fluctuates. But I don't know that I've been wrong about that. I don't know, Ned. I mean, I don't feel like I'm wrong about very much. So, I'm hesitant to stand up here and say that I was ever wrong about something.
All right, fair enough. We have Dr. Carmody who's not changing his mind because he's correct too often.
About nothing, yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Carmody, thank you so much for spending this time with me. This was fantastic. As always, I really love our conversations together. Thank you for joining the podcast for Doctors by Doctors. We really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. I'll do it anytime.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you all very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next episode. Thanks for joining us this episode. You can catch the podcast for Doctors by Doctors on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and all the major podcasting platforms. If you enjoyed this episode or learned anything here today, please take a moment to give us a rating and subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode release. As always, thank you for listening. And the next time you see a doctor, maybe you should prescribe this podcast. We'll see you next time.